Hi, this is my review of the 13th Age Bestiary. The title of this book is quite misleading, and that's a good thing, because this is much more than just a bestiary. This is more than just a selection of monsters and NPCs to use in combat and non-combat encounters. This is also a world building tool, and it also reads like a game master guide. That is, you have a lot of plot devices, adventure and campaign seeds, different variations for a single type of monster, all sorts of tips and good advice to build encounters and adventures. Now, let's talk about the quality of the book. As expected of the 13th Age line of books, the quality is superb. This is a hardcover book and it's very sturdy. It has a lot of illustrations, and I will show you some of the illustrations as I review the book. The quality of the paper is great. It has great organization. It's very well written. I only found a small typo where it says monsters voted mostly likely. Should have been monsters voted most likely to have a slain icon, in my opinion. But everything else, it's top notch, it's high quality. Something that I really like, it's at the end of the book, besides the appendix, you have a unified monster list by level and role. That is, you can have a very easy time finding the right monster for a specific party of adventurers according to that level of the party. If you want to look for a blocker or perhaps a mook type of monster or a spoiler or a leader, you have all the different types of monsters right here. And this is quite useful because sometimes if you have a party of, let's say, a monk, a ranger and a sorcerer, you can find the right troop for the job, so to speak, even though troop is another type of role. So you're going to have a very easy time finding the right monster, the right tool for the job, so to speak. Maybe the addition of an index would have been nice, but despite that, everything else, very high quality, great organization. Now let's talk about the contents. First, you have a nice introduction giving you all sorts of information and tips and advice on how to use this book. And you're going to recognize that very specific and very well done style of writing of the 13th Age role-playing game. That expresses that level of epicness of high fantasy with a touch of tongue-in-cheek humor. And for example, you have odd monster lists. That is, lists with different situations in which you can use a specific monster. So for example, you have monsters that might negotiate or invoke a treaty, and you have monsters such as the Drow, the Manticore, the Blue Sorcerer, or you have monsters that might take you for ransom rather than just kill you, and you have the Centaur, the Red Dragons, the Red Caps, etc. And there's a lot of sense of humor inserted here and there. So for example, monsters voted most likely to have slain an icon. The Tarask. We're guessing it happened at least once upon a time. So that's great. It's very nice to read this style of writing. And you have tips on how to build battles. Because as I was telling you, some monsters have play different roles in a particular battle encounter. So for example, some monsters are wreckers, others are casters or spoilers. So let's say the game master throws a pack of ghouls at you. Right here. One would expect those ghouls to be really melee oriented, attacking you with their claws. But here you have the ghoul Puzzbuster, which is basically this bloated ghoul filled with juices of putrefaction, and it vomits at you. That's its attack. It throws up at you, and you will have to use a tactic or a general strategy that deals with ranged attacks. And you also have the Ghoul Licklash. And the Ghoul Licklash basically uses its tongue to get the player characters all tangled up, and it basically forces the player characters to fight against it and ignore some other targets. But maybe you would say, oh, but I need a ghoul that is quite effective at melee. Well, you have a Ghoul Flesh Ripper that is basically a wrecker, and that's your melee ghoul fighter right there. Or let's say that you're fighting a group of Ettercaps. Let's see if I can find them. Oh, here they are. They look quite fashionable, as you can see, with their web clothes or something, or tunic. So, the Ettercap, let's say you find an Ettercap battle group, and it could be composed of Ettercap hunters. So these Ettercaps are basically there to perform range attacks, maybe get foes tangled up with their web spray. But you also have Ettercap supplicants. And these are the casters of the Ettercap battle group. They're going to use acidic webs that deal ongoing damage. And of course, you could have an Ettercap warrior to keep those types of Ettercaps safe. And you also have an Ettercap keeper that acts as sort of like a leader to enhance the abilities of the others. So as you can see, a single monster can provide for a very interesting encounter. So if your group of players usually uses the same strategy for each and every encounter, this configuration of groups is going to surprise them. You also have more tips on how to build unique battles with monster personalities, power blocks represented by the 13 icons. So for example, maybe you find monsters that normally wouldn't work together, but because they work under the same icon, they serve a specific icon, that they're going to work together, and it will make for some very difficult battle situations. And each monster has a lot of detail. They go into a lot of depth when it comes to background information and roles, ways in which you can use the monster, rules and such. So for example, here you have a bat with different types of bats, and some that serve as mounts. You have the Black Dragon, a classic monster, of course. But then you can see the potential of the variations. For example, take a look at this Empyrean Dragon. And each of the different special attacks also have a lot of like a sense of humor. So for example, there are monsters that will remind you of the demon in the Exorcist film, and it again it attacks with the way to throw up. And there are also some skulls that the game master basically has to come up with a pun, with a horrible pun as he makes the attack, and that will give that undead monster bonus. So for example, maybe the skull comes rolling at the player characters, and you could say something like heads will roll, or look out ahead, and something like that, a terrible pun, and it will give you a bonus. And so there are many attacks that add a bit of meta aspect to the game. Some monsters go really in depth. So for example, you have the Chimera, and with this one you have different ways that the Chimera changes. It feels like a creature of chaos almost, because depending on the icon rolls that you get, that Chimera will get a benefit or a flaw. So for example, something related to the Archmage, the Chimera could have a bearded spell-eating head. When a spell attack misses the Chimera, it has no miss effect, and the Chimera heals 40 hit points. Or maybe there could be a flaw such as vulnerability in melee. The crit range of melee attacks against the Chimera expands by 2. So as you can see, it makes a lot of sense with the theme of the Archmage, that is powerful with spells, weak with melee. And that way the Chimera encounter is going to feel more original. This monster I really like. This is the Chul. And the Chul, it's basically a way to get magic items. You could build an entire set of Chul items from this monster, but they are symbiotic and somewhat parasitic That is, this set of armor will inject eggs into you, and then they will sprout. And if you get lucky, well, you will get more tool items. But there's also a possibility that a monster will be come out of that egg. So that's quite interesting. So there are a few monsters in this bestiary that give you interesting magic items. You have a very nice section on the draw. In fact, if you have draw player characters, they are probably going to ask you to get one of these mounts for them in the game, because spider mounts are awesome, even though they are quite yucky. They can climb up walls and ceilings, so that's pretty cool. This is the one I was telling you that seems kind of like the Exorcist creature. This is the D-Book. They even give you like different origins. Maybe it's a possessing ghost or a demon or an alien. And because the 13th Age is your game, you're going to choose the exact origin of that creature. And it's just amazing the level of depth into which each monster is described. Have the Elder Beast. Quite gross. They give you adventure seeds, variations, background information, adventure hooks, plot devices. So each monster can serve as a base for a group of adventures, or with a lot of imagination it could serve like the start for a campaign. A lot of classic monsters like the Frost Giant. I really like the section on fungaloids. You know, those classic fungi monsters or non-player characters, because in many games they are somewhat they're not warlike, they're somewhat peaceful in a sense, although some of them are quite dangerous. And here you get player race. If you want to play like a humanoid fungus type of adventurer, you have the Toixog that are very good at saving throws and regeneration, so that's quite nice. You have variations for gelatinous cubes, and some pretty the adventure seeds for this one, for these gelatinous enemies, are quite nice and really original in my opinion. And sometimes you also have like fragments or snippets of what characters think about a specific monster and different situations. Some of them are sort of like a joke. So for example, you have a guy giving you tips on how to fight ghouls, but then it says this was told by who knows what, or John Doe, the ranger prankster. So that could be a prank, something that it isn't really trustworthy information to defeat ghouls, but you could use that in your campaigns. Maybe the characters go into a tavern and they find this prankster and he starts giving them false tips on how to defeat ghouls, or maybe he's actually right. It's up to you. There are also different ways in which the different monsters relate to the icons. Maybe some of the icons actually use those monsters as minions, or maybe the icons hate those monsters. You will find different attitudes towards these creatures when it comes to the Dwarf King, the Emperor, the Lich King. My favorite entries are the ones of the Prince of Shadows, because as you know, the Prince of Shadows is a very important icon in the 13th Age role-playing game. And sometimes the Prince of Shadows is actually, it says something like, the Prince of Shadows is actually this monster, or this other monster works for the Prince of Shadows, or the Prince of Shadow wants to recruit that monster into his forces. So there's something always like tricky, and that further makes the complicated identity of the Prince of Shadows more unfathomable. There's an excellent section on the Intellect Devourer, because these creatures, as many of the grognards know, they eat the the brain of an adventurer, and they take control of the body. But here you have a very interesting way in which you can keep on playing as that adventurer. So let's say that your adventurer gets killed by an intellect devourer, but you're kind of like, oh, I love that adventurer. But you could work with the game master so that you keep playing as that adventurer. Maybe the other members of the party never found out about this intellect devourer eating the brain of their friend. So now you can play as an intellect devourer controlling the body of an adventurer, and that's pretty cool. Like nobody will ever find out, or maybe they will, and some conflict will ensue. You also have some pretty humorous entries for kobolds. They actually give you tips that maybe it's not for your campaign, because maybe your campaign is quite a bit more serious. But I would recommend using them. If you like poodle riding kobolds, that's pretty funny. You could use that, and that could also serve as sort of like a distraction for the player characters. Maybe they see this kobold riding a puppy and they're going to be like, oh, that's so ridiculous or so cute, and then this kobold starts killing and wrecking the entire party apart. So that could be funny. I also like the section on leech, details on their phylactery and their relationship with the Lich King. As you can see, they go into great depth, and they give a sense of freshness to classic fantasy monsters. You have red caps here, and their variations have some very funny names. So you have the splotch cap, the red cap, the crimson cap, the crusty cap, and each one of them has a specific role in a fight. So some of them are spoilers, others are wreckers, and some others are archers. As I was telling you, adding variety to each encounter, and you have other beloved monsters, at least for game masters, such as the remoras. I also saw the purple worm around there with information on larvae, and oh, here it is. And some sort of like beetles or parasites that ride on top of its carapace. That's very nice. And of course you have the Tarrasque, an old favorite. Let's see if I can find it, because the illustration is quite nice. The Tarrasque always has a different look depending on the bestiary. Here it's like a monstrous dinosaur, in my opinion. Sort of like a dinosaur-y look. And at the end of the book, you have information to create your own monsters. They give you examples, ways in which you can use the D20 to perform special attacks and such, how to use the escalation die. Everything's just great. Well, let me tell you what I think of this book. This book is quite perfect. It's not just a bestiary, it's a world building tool. This is not just a selection of monsters. You can do so much with this book alone. It kind of feels like, as I was telling you, like a game master guide and a campaign setting book or source book. You need to get this one. If you play a 13th Age role-playing game, get this one. And it's even quite useful. For example, if you play other fantasy role-playing game systems, there's a lot of background information here and interesting attacks and variations for different classic monsters and some new ones. So for example, one of the new monsters that I liked are the let's see if I can find the Zorigami, because they have sort of like a planescape vibe to them. Not exactly like that. Let me give you oh, here is another look. So they add that sense of science fantasy into 13th Age, and they look really nice and have so many ways in which you can use them for adventure hooks and develop plot lines. So this bestiary just adds a lot. It goes beyond what is expected of a bestiary. Definitely get this one. If you are a 13th Age player, you must get it. Of course, a game master, because There's also a lot of things that you could use secrets for your campaign. And as I was telling you, if you play other fantasy role-playing games, you should consider getting this one. It's a really great book. Well, thanks for watching my review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.